Well, good afternoon, and I'm here with Jordan Page, who's talking to us from South Carolina. And Jordan is out there in the field, working with kids, working with teachers, working with early childhood, and a lot of experience there. She is in the process of forming uh, uh, a group, a service called Page by Page Literacy. What a perfect title. And she is an adjunct at the University of South Carolina and supervises early childhood students. So I hope I haven't stolen all your thunder. The way I usually start is saying, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into other things. So it's all you.
Perfect. Well, thank you for having me, Dr. Sam. I wore my literary lady
All
t-shirt,
right.
your I Heart Reading hat, so maybe this will become my podcast t-shirt.
I love
Um,
it. Okay.
but yes, so I am currently, I feel like I have the best of both worlds. I get to support our up and coming teachers at the university with their theory on play, specifically in early childhood, but literacy. I was a literacy coach. That is my heart and my passion as well. And I get to really coach and channel that when I'm with my pre-service teachers in the classroom doing their student teaching. So I get to read all the books and also see it in practice. And so I can practice what I preach very much so, and get to coach up our new teachers. So it is definitely a joy and honor to be with our pre-service teachers as they head into the classroom.
And boy, those folks don't get the kind of credit they deserve, do they? I mean,
Yeah.
they are my heroes.
Yes.
And I'm just remembering how it was back in the day and how it is now. And oh my
So
God,
different.
I had it so easy and
Yeah.
they don't.
Yeah.
So thank you for
That's true.
supporting them, and thank you for what you're doing too. Now, that all said, let's start talking about play, and then we'll take it from there.
Yeah. Play. So play is something, like you said, how education has evolved. I feel like we're in this place where teachers are just trying to get all the content that they're required to teach shoved into one day, and there's never enough time. And unfortunately, in the early childhood classroom, we have seen play kind of dwindle down out of the classroom, even from when I was teaching in the classroom. Play in kindergarten was much more prevalent than my student teachers are seeing now. But I like to think about play as the bedrock and the foundation for everything. And when teachers don't have a strong understanding of play, and they try to build all these things off of it, math and literacy and classroom community and management, yet they don't see the underlying value of play, it can all crumble. And so I think about play, it's not in opposition to learning. And inquiry is not in opposition to direct instruction. I think of play as like the fertilizer for brain growth. And there's so much research out there. I'm not a psychologist by any means, but you can look anywhere and see the research that supports early childhood education, and not even early childhood. I think there's so much research out there that shows play in their long-term effects. Play has its short-term effects, of course, of de-stressing and all of these things, but it's known as having a sleeper effect. And so we might not see all of the benefits in play in kindergarten or first grade, but when we have, young adults and adults, these benefits really do play out. So in play, we have, again, not a psychologist, but we have the neocortex is activated. So that thinking hub, and the amygdala, which is the emotional hub, are both activated in play, which are so foundational for our children. And I think we have to remember, we're not just teaching a first grader, we're not just teaching a third grader, but we're teaching whole children. And so I think that is the why behind play, is that because it's so essential to these lifelong learners and future adults, we can't not do it. It's essential. Dr. Mary Howard talks about going from good to great. I think play is great plus plus plus, right? It's essential. And I think there's nothing that we could replace play with that's better than play.
Music to my ears. Okay. Now let's get into the nuts and bolts of it. Okay.
Sure.
So now let's take me way back, and oh my gosh, we need a time machine for that. But let's say I'm now a spanking new pre-service teacher in your course, and you're about to show me how to do what you're talking about, which is include both play and direct instruction. And how do you do that? What are some good resources? What are some things you might say to get that through this thick skull? And
Sure.
well, just tell us how you do it in real life. What does it
Yeah.
look like?
What does it look like? So I think you have to really look at your schedule. I do this with a lot of my teachers that I've coached is, looking at your schedule, what does it say about what you believe? And so you have to know the why behind what you're doing. And there's not time for every single thing that we have to do. Again, we have to think about what is great and going to have the most payoff. And so when actually looking at a schedule, I think looking realistically, there are times where we have to have direct instruction. Okay, so maybe our mini lessons, we really want those geared towards the majority of the class or on grade level content. But we also want to kind of position that couple it with unstructured times as well. So whether that's an actual choice time for having play, you might be able to do that. But even if you don't have that actual time dedicated solely to play, you can integrate play throughout your entire day. So maybe it's before you sit kids down on the rug for a mini lesson. Maybe you're doing a warm up that's a game, right? You could do some phonemic awareness practice with singing a song, right? Willaby, wallaby, wham, the elephant sat on Sam, right? Willaby, wallaby, Warden, the elephant sat on Jordan. Okay, so quick little things like that. There's not a real definition of play out there. You'll get a different definition wherever you look. But I think the number one thing we have to remember that is play, it's enjoyable, it's fun. Children are smiling, they're laughing, and it's child-centered. And so anytime we can foster that in our lessons, the better. But again, thinking about your structure of your day, we don't want kids sitting on the rug, especially in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, for more than 10, maybe 15 minutes at a time. That's even pushing it. But how can we integrate movement, that locomotor movement? That's part of play. Singing, dancing throughout our instruction, and there can be learning in that as well.
Okay, well, you're kind of the second person I've talked to today that's talking about getting it integrated into the whole school day. Eric Litwin and I just had a conversation earlier today, and that's exactly what he's saying to do, and is, of course, a master at that kind of thing. So, do I understand you might have some books sitting on your desk that you want to share with us?
Yes. One that I love that I recommend to any pre-service teacher, even new teacher in the classroom. It's called Kids First from Day One. It's by Christine Hertz and Christy Mraz. Christy and I actually taught at the same school back when I was a first grade teacher. But it is a handbook. It is super practical, and it covers everything from the importance of play to how to structure your day, how to integrate play into your teaching, how to integrate your teaching into play. But also it gives you some resources for building reflection into your day, teaching empathy, a lot of mindfulness. It's just a really great book that covers so much, and it's so practical. So it is a great resource to have. for
And I
any
will make it a point to have a link to that book in the blog.
Yes. And one more that I have is it can be for teachers or just adults in general. It's by Dr. Stuart Brown. It's a little bit older of a book. It's called Play, How It Shapes the Brain, Opens the Imagination, Invigorates the Soul. And I love his work because he actually works mostly with adults and talks about how play is not just a preschooler's language, but it is really the work of humans. And he works with a lot of corporations, Google, Microsoft, and teaching play into the workforce, which I think is so interesting. But one thing that I love about that book is he talks about play personalities as adults. And I think I've found that useful for going into the classroom. What is my play personality as an adult, and how does that influence me as a teacher? I know that I am an explorer. And so in my classroom, we did so much exploring outside, lots of inquiries that was very rigorous. Whereas some teachers are more of a storyteller, some are more of the jokester who likes to integrate humor into their teaching. So I think it's a really cool way to not only focus our play with our students, but also be a little bit more playful ourselves, because we can get so tense as teachers. I think it's important to bring that part of ourselves into the room.
Wow. And then when does your next class start and how do I enroll?
Next
Okay.
semester, come on.
Yeah, I guess it would be quite a commute though. All
Yeah.
right. I'm looking for stories from the field now
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
events and stuff that's happened,
Mhm.
aha moments that some of your teachers might have had, some aha moment you might have had, and just
Yeah,
we're looking for practical advice here. So how in the
sure.
world, we've got all this theory going around, how in the world
Mhm.
do we integrate it in, and what does that look like in the field? And just tell us about how things are out there.
Sure. Yeah. So I think the first thing I think about is, and something I coach my pre-service teachers a lot on, is kid watching. I think there's so much information we can gain from kid watching, especially in those unstructured times. So whether it's out at recess, if you do have some sort of play, choice time, center time built into your schedule, that's not a time for us to check out as teachers, but to really lean in. What are my students talking about? What conflicts are arising? How are they playing symbolically? Because that can really inform our teaching. One thing I noticed actually from one of my pre-service teachers, she was doing some kid watching and noticed conflict was arising in the block center. Kids were having trouble sharing, and it was just a continual issue they were having. So rather than just correcting them in the moment and talking it through just the small group and moving on, it became a teachable moment for the whole class. But what I love that she did that took it even further was she integrated it into morning meeting and integrated literacy into it. So she made that the subject of their interactive writing for that morning. So she had her interactive writing chart on the board, and they wrote all about steps for problem solving in the block center. And it was a beautiful integration of that phonics work. And also it was super authentic and was meaningful to them. And it wasn't just a drill and kill worksheet where they were working on those phonics skills. It was something useful that they could use. And that came out of kid watching from a play scenario. So I think when we think like that as teachers, not only how can I integrate play into the day, but how can I integrate literacy and math into play? I think it can be so beautiful and so authentic and so meaningful for the kids in front of us.
Yeah. Well, you're bringing me back to my workshop days and remembering
Yeah.
one of, I think it might have been a Sokenyam, saying, what does it look like?
Mhm.
When I'm in the conference, what does it look like? And the
Mhm.
kids are just totally into that. So that is great. And I'm glad to hear that that's still out there. Okay,
Yeah.
I think we're working a long time here. So before I say, well, let me do say this. Any other thoughts, final thoughts, things we've left out, things you need,
Sure.
burning issues for you? Uh,
I just,
have at
I
it.
think, sure. I think I love to make the connection of play and literacy, especially in those early literacy years. Um, and one thing that I think is so fascinating and kind of it shows how important the play is symbolic play. So this is just one of the many ways that play can increase that early literacy. When we have children playing symbolically, let's say they have a wooden block and they start to learn how to use the block to be a phone. And then one day it can be a symbolic representation for I don't know, a door or a baby doll, right? So that is super important and foundational for being able to use symbols in early literacy. So first off, we might see that come into play with environmental print. I'm able to see that the red dot symbol is the sign for Target, where I love to go after school, which then supports, early literacy with that sound symbol relationship. I know that C can represent, but I also know, just like how that block can be a phone, it can be a door, it can be a baby doll, that the grapheme C can also represent S in some words. And so, and that comes from play. Kids being able to have those multiple transformations of symbolic play that sets them up for literacy. There are things as well. Play sets up for math, having that spatial recognition. So there are so many ways that I won't get into and don't have the capacity for, but that play really is foundational for those early academic skills that people just don't realize how important it is. And that's kind of what I feel like my work is helping students realize and be able to advocate for play, right? My students need to know how to manipulate sounds, and that starts with play, and that's why we play. And so I think that's something I always charge student teachers with is know why play is important, because you're going to get backlash and say you don't have time for this in your schedule, whether it's from a colleague, an administrator. And knowing things like that of how it supports early literacy, mathematical thinking, social skills, right, is so important to be able to stand up for it and say, this is how it matters for my kids and how it matters to lifelong learners. And that's why we're going to do it. So I just think that's important to know those things and to be able to advocate and articulate those.
What a wonderful summary. I'll give you a teacher's compliment. I hope everyone noticed that when she said "k" and when she said "s," there was no on the end. She did not
Oh, yes.
that schwa. And whenever I do any kind of sound symbol, things like that, that's the very first thing I say, because you start throwing that schwa sound in and all kinds of mean, nasty things happen. And you were just modeling that without even thinking about it. Perfect. So
It's because I correct it all the time too, Dr. Sam.
well, it's really, I sometimes do like video lessons and things like that. Boy, is it hard to do with a microphone in front of you. Not to throw that, you just, are you hearing anything out there? Okay. Okay, now I'm kind of digressing. So this has been just delightful. Uh, I'm more than halfway serious about wanting to take your course. Think
Please,
that,
I would love that.
okay, I
We'll
think
get
that
much more in depth, much more in depth.
okay, and I think that part of the audience here is going to. This is kind of like one of the things I'm doing for the early years literacy conference that's happening, and so this will be the second video that will promote that conference, and certainly people at the conference, boy, that you just got a free coursework in early literacy with all kinds of terrific pointers. So I really want to thank you for your time. I think it's now come to that point in time where we have to do that famous or infamous Zoom wave goodbye. So let's see how you can do it. Zoom wave,
Yay, I'm
please.
giving 2 hands.
Hey, all right, I love it. All right, till later, and that's a wrap.